All right. So yesterday we talked about cellular respiration, and specifically we talked about a process called aerobic respiration. That's a type of respiration that's going to require oxygen. You may have heard of aerobic exercises in gym class. Those are very strenuous exercises that require a lot of oxygen. That's like swimming. If you go for a swim, like going back and forth, your body needs a lot of oxygen. So those are aerobic processes. Our next vocabulary is going to be anaerobic processes. These are processes that don't require oxygen. Now, the difference between the exercise is anaerobics like golf. I have nothing against golf. Golf is great, but you don't require a lot of oxygen for golf. It's an anaerobic exercise. With aerobic respiration, we require oxygen, but we produce a lot more ATP. Anaerobic doesn't require oxygen, but it produces less ATP.
So anaerobic respiration, we're going to dive a little bit more deeper into because we went over aerobic respiration yesterday with cellular respiration. This is not an effective way of making ATP. It's known as fermentation as well. And we're going to talk about why your body would go through this if it's not an effective way to make ATP. The two different types are lactic acid fermentation and alcohol fermentation. We're going to talk about each a little bit deeper and a little bit more in depth in the next two slides. All right, so with lactic acid fermentation, this occurs in your cells, and this occurs after or during when your body is in like vigorous exercise. You're using your muscles a lot. This is because, like, let's say you're running a mile. Your cells are going to use up a lot and all of the oxygen in each cell. So that's why you start breathing hard, is that you use up all that oxygen in your cells. So with no oxygen, your body can't go through prep step, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Because remember, glycolysis is anaerobic. It doesn't need oxygen. So your body still will go through glycolysis, but if you remember, there's not a lot of ATP produced per glucose molecule in glycolysis. So your body switches to something that is called lactic acid fermentation. So after glycolysis, it will not go into the prep step, Krebs cycle, and electron transport chain. After glycolysis, it will go into lactic acid fermentation. This is because you don't have oxygen in your body. You're breathing really hard. Think about that fourth lap of the mile race you're running. You are just you're bent over. You're breathing hard. You don't have any oxygen in your body. It's because you used up all that oxygen. This is alcohol fermentation. You can see glucose gets changed in pyruvate, just like always in glycolysis. But pyruvate is going to get changed into something called acetaldehyde, and then that gets changed into something called ethanol. And ethanol is what makes alcoholic drinks alcoholic. This is the alcohol that people drink in beers and wines. I'm just showing you the two different processes and how they are related between lactic acid fermentation and alcohol fermentation. The other type of fermentation or anaerobic respiration is called alcohol fermentation. This is where bacteria and yeast are going to produce things like wines and beers. So they actually make a byproduct of alcohol in an anaerobic environment. You can see these kind of cauldrons, these kind of I don't know, you call them glass containers, are going to seal off the liquid and the bacteria and the sugars in an anaerobic environment. That way, the bacteria and yeast will start breaking down the sugars, and they'll make alcohol as a byproduct. So this is a process that makes beer and wine. This is how all beers and wines are made. You have to have bacteria in an anaerobic environment with a couple sugars, and after a while, it will make alcohol. Now, oddly enough, the bacteria will make so much alcohol that it will actually kill off all the bacteria in that cauldron. So that's why you don't really drink bacteria. At the bottom of these cauldrons, you can see there's stuff down there that's partly dead bacteria. We use that bacteria in their processes to make beers and wines. All right, so this is lactic acid fermentation. It's kind of complicated, but all you have to know is that after glycolysis, we go into lactic acid fermentation instead of prep step, instead of the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. All you need to know is pyruvate gets changed into something called lactate or lactic acid. And this is part of your reason why your body feels so sore after some vigorous exercise. We still make 2 ATP per glucose molecule, which isn't a lot, but this is the thought. It's better to make a little bit of ATP than no ATP. So the other processes aren't working. You're not getting any ATP from the prep step, the Krebs cycle, or the electron transport chain. you're making no ATP there. It's better to keep this process going and get a little bit ATP than not having any ATP produced at all. If we compare ATP production between aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration, we see that we make 2 ATP in glycolysis, 2 ATP in the Krebs cycle, and 34 ATP in the electron transport chain for the aerobic respiration. That makes 38 ATP per glucose molecule, which is a lot. Our byproducts here are carbon dioxide and water. With lactic acid fermentation and alcohol fermentation, we aren't using oxygen, which means we only make 2 ATP. So again, we make a lot less ATP here, but remember, it's better to make a little bit of ATP rather than no ATP.